What you're about to hear will permanently change how you look at women, relationships, loyalty, marriage, and emotional intimacy. And before you brush it off, before you convince yourself this could never happen in your life, take a deep breath. Because what I'm about to reveal exists inside the minds of even the women who swear they would never cheat. The devoted wives, the loving girlfriends, the ones who seem morally unshakable. None of them are immune to what biology wired into them long before society ever existed. There's a psychological mechanism buried deep in the female brain, a neurological switch that activates under very specific emotional and hormonal conditions. Once triggered, it can override logic, loyalty, upbringing, marriage vows, personal values, even motherhood. And the scariest part is that most women don't even realize it's happening. They don't wake up thinking, today is the day I betray the person I love. It starts quietly, invisibly, without intention. To understand it, you first need to know the truth about the beginning of every relationship. People love calling it romance, destiny, butterflies, soulmates. But biologically, it's a chemical overdose. Those early months aren't love. They're dopamine and oxytocin flooding her brain like narcotics. Her heart races when she sees your name pop up on her phone. Her stomach flips when you touch her. She feels chosen, adored, obsessed, because her brain temporarily turned you into a neurological reward system. That exhilarating passion couples brag about online isn't fate. It's chemistry hijacking perception. During this phase, she filters reality. She overlooks flaws. She romanticizes effort. She rewrites past relationships as irrelevant. She tells her friends she finally found someone different. You feel like the luckiest man alive, and she feels like she discovered her missing piece. But in truth, her brain is simply reacting to novelty, unpredictability, anticipation, the things evolution linked to attraction. And like any high, it fades. 6 months in, maybe a year or two if you're one of the lucky ones, the intensity begins to settle. The fireworks turn into candles. The racing heartbeat becomes familiarity. The euphoric rush becomes comfort. And her brain transitions from dopamine to oxytocin, from excitement to bonding. Healthy, stable, long-term love thrives here. But to a brain addicted to early stimulation, that shift can feel like something died. This is where confusion begins. A woman who once couldn't take her hands off you starts wondering why she doesn't feel the same spark anymore. She interprets calm as distance, predictability as boredom, routine as emotional decline. The exact stability she used to crave now becomes the backdrop for restless thoughts she doesn't want to admit. She still loves you, but her brain misses the chemical storm that made everything feel cinematic. And in that tiny emotional gap, danger quietly enters. It doesn't start dramatically. It never does. It begins with something small, a glance, a compliment, a harmless conversation, a coworker asking how her weekend was. Nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone would consider cheating. But the brain recognizes novelty, and novelty triggers the first drop of dopamine she hasn't felt in a long time. Not enough to alarm her, just enough to remind her of how she used to feel when your relationship was new. That's when the internal dialogue changes. She starts noticing things she never cared about before. The way you chew, the way you breathe while watching TV, the fact that you don't plan dates the way you used to, the weight you gained, the jokes she once adored now feel repetitive. These things were always there, but without dopamine filtering reality, they suddenly seem amplified. And while she tells herself nothing's wrong, her brain is already scanning the environment like a radar searching for stimulation. Not for love, not for connection, for chemistry. This is the moment most men miss completely. She doesn't pull away physically, at least not yet. She doesn't stop talking to you. She doesn't seem distant. On the outside, everything looks normal. But psychologically, her brain is preparing to re-experience the emotional drug it lost. And if life places temptation within reach, a gym trainer, a work colleague, an old classmate, someone who gives her attention without responsibility, she becomes biologically vulnerable in ways she can't consciously control. Not because she's evil, not because she planned it, but because she's human.
I've seen this happen so many times that it feels scripted. The perfect marriage that suddenly collapses out of nowhere. The committed girlfriend who seems stable until a new person enters her social circle. The woman who once swore she hated cheaters but eventually becomes one herself. And everyone around her says the same stunned sentence. I never thought she'd be capable of that. But once you understand how the chemistry works, once you see how novelty manipulates perception, once you recognize how attention intoxicates the female brain, none of it is surprising anymore. Cheating doesn't begin with action. It begins with a feeling she doesn't know how to interpret and the fantasy she doesn't yet realize she's feeding. And that's just the starting point.
Here's where things shift from invisible to inevitable. And most men never notice it happening until it's already too late. Because once that tiny dopamine spark appears, she doesn't run from it. She studies it. She tries to understand it. She wonders why it felt good. And instead of shutting the door immediately, she leaves it open just a crack. Not enough to admit anything, but enough to let curiosity slip through. This is the silent beginning of emotional cheating. The most dangerous form because it feels harmless. Maybe it starts at work. He compliments her presentation. He laughs at her jokes. He remembers small details. He looks at her the way you did during the early days. She feels that forgotten rush, the reminder that she's still desirable, still magnetic, still capable of awakening someone. And for a woman who hasn't felt admired in a long time, that sensation becomes addictive. She doesn't tell him to stop. She doesn't create distance. She doesn't shut down the interaction. Instead, she tells herself it's nothing, that she's just being friendly, that attention isn't a crime. And she believes it because admitting otherwise would force self-awareness she's not ready for. Meanwhile, her brain is already comparing, not fairly, but chemically. You represent routine, bills, laundry, responsibilities, familiarity. He represents possibility, fantasy, excitement, the version of herself she thinks she lost. You talk about errands and appointments. He talks about dreams and passions. You ask what she wants for dinner. He asks what she wants out of life. And slowly, without a single physical touch, she begins transferring emotional energy to someone who hasn't earned it. This is when she starts rewriting the story of your relationship, not to understand it, but to escape it. She used to brag about you. Now she vents about you. She begins highlighting flaws that never bothered her before. He doesn't listen. He doesn't try. He doesn't make me feel special. She convinces herself she's the neglected one, the unappreciated one, the woman trapped in a relationship where she deserves more. Not because it's true, but because it justifies the growing emotional attachment she doesn't want to admit she's building. And here's the psychological twist. She doesn't feel like she's cheating. She feels like she's awakening, like she's rediscovering a part of herself, like fate placed this person in her life at the exact moment she needed attention. She frames it as destiny, not temptation. And the rationalization gets worse. She tells herself every woman feels this eventually. She tells herself she shouldn't have to apologize for wanting to feel alive. She tells herself nothing bad is happening because technically she hasn't crossed the line yet. But something already has. She starts dressing differently, not for you, but for the chance of seeing him. She checks her phone obsessively, not for your messages, but his. She spends longer getting ready for places she knows he'll be. She finds reasons to stay late at work or go to the gym at a different time. Everything she does starts orbiting around the possibility of another dopamine hit. And here's the part no one likes acknowledging. That thrill she feels isn't about the other man. It's about herself, the woman she becomes in his presence. Mysterious, desired, interesting, unpredictable, feels more intoxicating than the actual person she's flirting with. She's not falling for him. She's falling for the version of herself reflected in his attention. That's why women who cheat rarely cheat with objectively better men. The affair partner is often less attractive, less successful, less stable, less compatible, but he gives her emotional novelty.
He mirrors back the identity she misses, the exciting woman she used to be before real life entered the room. And the scariest part, she can feel the shift happening in her body before she consciously admits it in her mind. Her pulse speeds up when she sees his name. Her pupils dilate when he smiles. Her voice softens around him. She initiates more conversations, then tells herself they just naturally happen. She starts hiding things, tiny things. But once secrecy begins, cheating has already started on a psychological level. This is where the emotional affair solidifies. She tells him things she doesn't tell you. Frustrations, insecurities, disappointment, private thoughts, personal stories. She invites him into her internal world. And emotional intimacy, not sex, is the true betrayal, because she's giving away the most valuable part of a relationship, not her body, but her inner life. Now she begins living a double reality, still committed to you publicly, but emotionally invested in someone else privately. And every time she chooses him in her mind, your relationship loses oxygen, until eventually she stops imagining a future with you and starts imagining one with him. But here's where the story turns dangerous, because the moment she realizes she could have him, the fantasy intensifies, and the thought she once feared becomes the thought she now can't stop entertaining. What if I chose him instead? That question alone is the beginning of the end, and most men don't even know it's been asked.
Here's the part nobody wants to talk about. Not women, not men, not therapists, not marriage counselors. Because once a woman crosses the line, once the emotional fantasy becomes physical reality, her psychology doesn't suddenly collapse into guilt. It actually becomes clearer, sharper, more defined. People assume cheating is reckless, impulsive, chaotic, accidental. But for women, it's almost always calculated. Not consciously, but chemically. The moment she decides to meet him alone, the decision has already been made inside her long before she ever admits it to herself. By the time she gets into the car, into the hotel room, onto the couch at his place, she already has a story prepared. Not for you, but for her own conscience. And the most disturbing truth is this: she doesn't feel like she's betraying you. She feels like she's claiming something she believes she deserves. In her mind, she's not cheating. She's fulfilling an emotional need that your relationship stopped providing, even if that isn't actually true. During the affair, her thoughts become frighteningly self-centered. She wonders how she looks, how desired she feels, how young she suddenly becomes again. She pays attention to his excitement, his attention, the way he studies her like she's rare, like she hasn't aged, like she's untouched by life. And the scariest thing? In that moment, she isn't thinking about you at all. You cease to exist. The kids, the home, the promises, the memories, the life you built, gone, replaced by biochemical tunnel vision. It's not love, it's intoxication. Afterward, when she leaves, that's when the internal war begins. Not because she regrets cheating, but because she has to choose which version of reality she wants to live in. She knows if she acknowledged what she did, she would have to face consequences, shame, responsibility. So instead, she rewires the narrative. She tells herself, you pushed her away. You stopped trying. You didn't meet her emotional needs. You changed. You failed her first. Because as long as she believes she was wronged, she doesn't have to feel guilty. This is where behavioral shifts become impossible to hide. She becomes emotionally unpredictable, overly affectionate some days, cold and distant others. She picks fights over random things, because emotional dissonance demands release. She accuses you of not trusting her, weaponizing shame to protect her secret. She becomes territorial over her phone, suddenly needs extra privacy, turns notifications off, flips the screen face down. She guards her new identity the way addicts guard their supply. But the most painful change? She stops seeing you as a person and starts seeing you as an obstacle to her new emotional high.
And yet, here's the twist men never expect. Deep down, she desperately hopes you never find out. Not because she wants to protect your feelings, but because finding out would force her to confront what she's become. As long as the secret stays hidden, she can pretend she's still the loyal partner, the good woman, the moral person she's always claimed to be. The lie lets her avoid becoming the villain in her own story. But reality always catches up. The chemical high eventually fades. The novelty wears off. The excitement becomes routine. The forbidden becomes ordinary. And suddenly, the man who once felt electrifying now feels inconvenient, annoying, demanding. She starts noticing his flaws the same way she once noticed yours. The jokes stop landing, the conversations feel shallow, the passion feels forced, because he was never the solution. He was a distraction from her own internal emptiness. And now she's stuck. If she leaves you, she loses stability, security, family, identity, everything she built. If she stays, she must suppress the truth of what she did, forever. The affair partner becomes a threat, a reminder, a loose end she hopes disappears. And eventually, most do. The majority of affairs don't turn into relationships. They simply dissolve, leaving behind quiet emotional wreckage. Meanwhile, the woman begins a new performance, the performance of normalcy. She hugs you tighter, initiates sex more often, pretends she's recommitted, smiles in family photos, posts love quotes online, anything to convince herself she's still worthy of the life she almost destroyed. But beneath the surface, her brain is haunted by a truth she'll never say out loud. She didn't cheat because something was missing in the relationship. She cheated because something was missing in herself. And here's where everything becomes brutally honest. Women don't cheat because they stop loving their partners. They cheat because they stop loving who they are within the relationship. They crave the version of themselves that only novelty can activate. They chase the feeling, not the person. They run from routine, not from commitment. They want to feel alive, not necessarily free. And until a woman understands that, until she recognizes her own biological vulnerability to stimulation and fantasy, she will repeat the cycle, blaming men, circumstances, timing, stress, anything but her own emotional impulsivity. That's why so many affairs repeat. Different man, same story. Different environment, same outcome. Different promises, same destruction. Because the root was never external, it was internal. And here's the chilling reality. Most men who've been cheated on never see it coming. They weren't abusive. They didn't cheat first. They didn't stop trying. They simply underestimated how quietly a woman can walk toward infidelity while still appearing loyal. So now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Not as a victim, not as a cynic, but as someone paying attention. If women cheat not out of hatred, but out of longing, fantasy, and neurochemistry, how many people right now are unknowingly living with a partner whose betrayal hasn't happened yet, but already started in her mind? Because emotional cheating always begins long before the physical act. And by the time it becomes visible, it's already too late. So tell me, what's the most shocking cheating story you've ever heard or witnessed? I bet someone in the comments has an even crazier one.